In the name of Allah, most merciful, most gracious. Having discussed the relationship between language functions, text types, and translation methods, we now move to the framework of translation methodology. As already pointed out, this suggested framework consists of the three main steps of translation as an activity. The first step is the step which is devoted to the comprehension of the source text. Comprehension of the source text is normally achieved through source text analysis. That is, to analyze the text in order to understand the meanings embedded in the text. The second step is the source text rendering and the target text production. The third step is the translation revision. These are, practically speaking, the three main steps of the suggested framework of translation methodology. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about the first step, which is the step that is intended to understand the meanings of the text through text analysis. So we are going to talk about source text analysis as a step in translation. There are two types of source text analysis involved in the translation process. The first one is overall analysis, and the second one is linguistic analysis. Under the overall analysis, translators normally identify the type of the text. They also identify the theme of the text, the tone of the text, and the writer's intention. Now, these are the three main things that translators normally look for during their preliminary reading of the text. Let's now look in detail at each one of these steps involved in source text analysis for the purpose of translating that text. Identification of the text type. This means translators normally try to identify the type of the text which is being translated. Now, this issue, identifying the text type, is a little bit controversial because there are different views with regard to the analysis and classification of texts. Many writers have suggested different points of view with regard to the text types. Some speak of the types types under media, literary, non-literary, which include technical, legal, business, political, and so on. Some other writers, like Nida and Peter Newmark, speak of text types in terms of types of style. And, for example, Peter Newmark, quoting Nida, speaks of narrative, descriptive, discussion, and dialogue. Other writers add some other categories like the argumentative text. Anyway, any text classification would normally help the translator to identify the basic things, the basic features of that text in order to locate himself within the area of text classification. Where does this or that text belong to? Why do we identify the text type? We identify the text type in order to get an idea about the sort of language used, the way the text is structured, the type of vocabulary used in that text, and the theme which is being discussed in that source text. The second thing that translators normally try to identify is the theme of the text. That is, what the text is talking about. Of course, this is a very important step because we cannot understand or claim to understand that we have got in mind what the text means unless we understand what it is talking about. Now, this relates to the ideas being discussed. Of course, there is a difference between the text type and the text theme. A political text may talk about history. A legal text may talk about a technical matter, so the theme is different from the text type. There are many themes, as there are many intentions and writers. So one of the main things that help translators in their translation is to identify what the text is talking about. Sometimes there is a main theme which is predominating the text, and there are some other sub-themes. Sometimes the text is talking about just one theme. Now, themes vary in complexity and in clarity from one writer to another and from one text to another. Now, when we talk about a novel, for example, of this size, or a novel of this size, this novel has, for example, a main theme and many other sub-themes. A novel usually talks about many things. Now, this is a literary text, but it has inside many passages which involve discussion, narrative, argumentation, and so on. And the themes vary from one event to another in the development of the story within the novel. But maybe the main theme is always clear or can be noticed or identified in different parts of the novel, because a novel usually centers about a main theme and some other themes. In a small text, like a document, for example, a document would normally talk about one theme. A short text talks about one theme. Sometimes a legal document talks about more than one theme. So the translator here would normally look for the main theme and the sub-themes. If there is only one theme, it would be clear from the text. Next, the identification of the text tone. The text tone is very important in translation because it constitutes one of the distinctive features of the text. Now, tones vary. Sometimes the tone is optimistic or pessimistic. Sometimes there is a sarcastic tone. Sometimes there is a critical tone. So the translator would benefit from identifying the type of tone being used in the text. Sometimes there is a neutral tone, especially when we come to scientific and technical texts. We don't normally notice a specific tone. It's a neutral tone. Now, in literature, in politics, in authoritative statements, we may notice a specific tone in the text. But when it comes to technical and scientific writing, we rarely notice a specific tone. The tone here is neutral. Now, why do we need to identify the tone in translation? We need this because the tone, as I said, constitutes one of the features of the text being translated. And the translator has to reflect this tone in the target text, because in the target text, this distinctive feature, the tone, has to be present for the target language readers. Finally, identification of the source language text intention, and that is the writer's intention. This is also a controversial issue because it's very difficult to claim that we have identified a specific intention, because there is always the writer's intention and the reader's understanding or interpretation of the text. Now, what we may say is meant by the writer may not be true. The writer may not have meant that. So, how can we compromise between the writer's real intention and what the translators make of the text? Now here it is, as I said, a controversial area, but translators would normally benefit from identifying clear indications, clear characteristics of the text with regard to the writer's intention. If the writer is writing in support of something, or is calling for the readers to support a certain issue or a cause, so the intention would normally be the readers are wanted or are called upon to support this or that issue. If the writer is rejecting something and the writer uses certain vocabulary items, certain structures, certain phrases in rejecting that thing or that issue. So the intention here would normally be to call upon the readers to reject that or this idea. The writer's intention sometimes is implied. Many writers imply certain ideas, and that is their intention. The translators are normally critical readers who read with a critical sense. This critical sense enables them to identify certain ideas, certain attitudes, feelings, or stances taken by the writer towards an issue, a person, a thing. It depends, of course, on the sort of text and the sort of topic being discussed in that text and the translation. This overall analysis, as I have already mentioned, which includes identification of the text type, identification of the text theme, identification of the text tone, and identification of the source language writer's intention, fall within the overall analysis of the text before translating it. This overall analysis would normally help the translator to form an idea about the text. This idea would be the basis or the background for the translation to be produced by that translator. This background would normally be the frame of reference for selecting a specific interpretation of a specific vocabulary item, or for selecting a target language item instead of another, because the translator would normally refer to his analysis, to his interpretation of the text in order to take a decision with regard to this or that item when translating. The second step or the second type of analysis is the linguistic analysis. This linguistic analysis also falls into 3 or 4 subtypes of analysis: lexical analysis, grammatical analysis, stylistic analysis, and textual analysis. Under lexical analysis, translators normally analyze the vocabulary items of the source text. Now, here we normally look for keywords. We look into the sort of words used in terms of a structure. Are they simple or complex? We look if there are technical terms, archaic words, idiosyncratic words, foreign words, cultural bound items, neologisms, abbreviations, etc. All vocabulary items have to be looked at in order to form an idea about the sort of lexicology used by the writer, in order to form an impression from a lexical point of view about this text. Now, this impression is very necessary for picking up target language items to match, from an equivalence point of view, the source language text items used by the source language writer. This sort of lexical analysis is very important because words are sometimes used symbolically. Sometimes they are used to carry out or to convey a cultural flavor, a local flavor sometimes, especially when using cultural words or quotations, lexical quotations from religious books, for example, or from novels, or from historical fables and stories, or poems. All these lexical items used in texts refer to certain values. These semantic values or reference values are very important for the translator because all these constitute distinctive features of the source text. And of course, all features have to be reflected in the translation unless they are of that sort which falls under the translation loss, especially when it comes to culture. There are certain cultural connotations which sometimes get lost in the way between source language culture and target language culture. Words, as I said, are sometimes used symbolically. Now, if we read Bidaya wa Nihaya by Najib Mahfouz, we find the writer using the word Nafisa as a name for one of the characters, a female character. The word Nafisa in Arabic means precious, but when we read the novel and we follow the development of the story, we find out that this Nafisa, which means precious, has started selling herself and her body for the purpose of money, and what was precious became now very cheap. So this symbolic use of the word is employed sarcastically by the writer to imply or to talk about a certain social matter at a specific time in the life of the Egyptian people, for example. Another writer, an English writer, Thomas Hardy, in his novel Tess of the D'Urbervilles, uses the word basket many times. The basket is used in two ways. The basket was used to talk about the psychological and social emptiness of one of the characters, when the writer says that character, John d'Urberville, was having an empty basket. Here, the writer refers symbolically to the emptiness of that character from the social point of view and spiritual point of view, of course. The writer, Thomas Hardy, also uses the word basket symbolically when he attaches this word with the heroine of the novel, the girl who was pregnant at some time, and when she was coming back to her family's house, the basket was heavy. When she started her journey, the basket was empty. Now, the heavy basket here indicates or implies pregnancy. She came back, or she returned to her family pregnant. Now, such use of the words have to be spotted, have to be taken into consideration in translation. If these words are transparent in the target language, they would normally convey the same symbolic meanings. If they are not, the translator would take a decision whether to paraphrase or to gloss or to support the translation with an explanation as a footnote or in the translation introduction. Linguistic analysis. Now, linguistic analysis in terms of grammar. Grammar refers to syntax and syntactic structures. Here, translators normally look at the type of syntactic structures used in the text. Are the sentences short or long? Are there any special syntactic structures? Is there any special use of punctuation? Is the writer using specifically nouns, verbs, adjectives, or adverbs? We know in a descriptive text we would find many adjectives. In a story talking about events and developments, we would find many verbs, because verbs indicate action and movement. Now, syntactic structures in terms of simplicity and complexity may reflect simplicity or complexity of the idea being discussed in the source text. So analyzing these syntactic matters would help the translator reflect whatever implications or significance they have in the source text to be reflected in the target text. Stylistic analysis. This involves identification of the predominant style, formal or informal, the use of nominalization and verbalization, also the use of affronting, for example, the use of metaphor, ambiguity, active or passive, repetition and variation, and so on. All these stylistic features have to be spotted, and their value or significance in the source text has to be identified in order to be taken into consideration and to be reflected as possible in the target language. Now, stylistic matters are very problematic sometimes when the two languages involved in the translation act are structurally different, like for example English and Arabic. Here, sometimes the translator has to compensate and look for some sort of functional structures that convey the same feature of the source language text. Now, when the translator finishes the analysis of the source text, he or she would have formed a general idea about the meanings of the text from different points of view, from different aspects, the linguistic aspect and the general aspect. Now, under the linguistic aspect, the translator would have got an idea about the type of words, type of syntactic structures, type of stylistic analysis. All these features would have formed the general textual structure of the text. So here we may talk about the textual analysis of the text. Now, textual analysis refers to cohesion and coherence, to see how is the text coherent and how it is cohesive. What are the cohesive devices used and what are the coherence devices used? Cohesion is a network of surface relations, linguistic relations. That is to say, relations between the linguistic units. They relate to syntax, they relate to punctuation, they relate to the use of anaphora and cataphora, referencing forward and referencing backward. The use of pronouns here is very common. Coherence is the relationship between ideas, the network of semantic relations between the different units, semantic units of the text. That is what makes a text talks about a theme, a one theme, an idea we don't notice a break in the ideas. We don't find the absence of a link between two parts of the text from a semantic point of view. That is what we mean by coherence. Now, when the writer finishes this analysis, he or she would have benefited in terms of comprehending the text, forming a good background to help him or her translate the text into the target language. Now, all this analysis, of course, would vary from one translator to another, because, as we always say, the translator is a reader, and readers have different readings of the same text, because reading involves interpretation. So different translators would base their translations on different interpretations. Therefore, different translators produce different translations. Now, if the target text, which is the translation product, is based on proper analysis of the source language text, we expect that target text to contain as many as possible of the source text features, including lexical, grammatical, stylistic, and textual. Thank you.